It was a Wednesday night in October when my throat started closing, and the first person I called was my husband. He didn't pick up. I called again, nothing. I called my mother-in-law, voicemail. I called my sister-in-law, Becca. The phone rang 7 times and went to voicemail. I stood in my kitchen, holding a takeout container of pad thai with my left hand and my phone with my right, and I could feel the inside of my throat getting smaller with every breath. Not dramatically, not like the movies where someone grabs their neck and crashes into things. Just smaller, tighter. Like someone was very slowly, very calmly turning a dial. I have a severe peanut allergy. I've had it since I was 4 years old. My mother drilled it into me the way some parents drill fire safety or stranger danger. You check every label, you tell every server, you carry your EpiPen. Always. I've had minor reactions before. Hives, itchy eyes, that awful tingling at the back of my mouth that tells you something got in. But I had never, in 31 years, experienced full anaphylaxis. I didn't know until later that the restaurant had switched peanut oil suppliers and failed to update their allergen information. All I knew in that moment was that my throat was tightening, my lips felt like they were made of rubber, and my hands were starting to shake. I grabbed my EpiPen from the kitchen drawer, used it, called 911. And then, because I was terrified and still conscious, and I needed someone, I called my husband again. I want to be honest about this part because I've thought about it 1,000 times since. I wasn't calling him to come rescue me. I had already called 911. I had already administered the epinephrine. I was calling because I was scared, and he was my husband. And when you are alone in your kitchen and you think you might be dying, you call the person who is supposed to be your person. He didn't answer. I called 23 times total between that first call and the moment the paramedics arrived. 23. I know because I checked the call log from my hospital bed 3 days later, when I was finally coherent enough to look at my phone. I sat there staring at that number for a long time. 23 calls. Not one answered. The paramedics were there within 9 minutes. I remember the sound of the door. I had left it unlocked when the tingling started, some instinct telling me to do that. And then boots on the floor and voices that were calm in a way that made the panic in my chest loosen just slightly. They worked fast. I remember an oxygen mask. I remember being lifted. I remember the particular orange color of the streetlight through the ambulance window as we pulled out, and then I don't remember anything else for a while. I was in the ICU for 2 days. Anaphylaxis, when it's severe enough, doesn't just close your airway. It drops your blood pressure so fast your body can't compensate. Mine dropped to the point where my heart went into a dangerous arrhythmia in the ambulance. The paramedics had to intervene. I don't remember any of it. I woke up in the ICU with an IV in my arm and a nurse beside me who had the kind of face that communicates very clearly without saying anything that you have been through something serious. I asked her if my husband had come. She told me my emergency contacts had been notified. I could see in her face that there was more to that sentence than she was allowed to finish. The attending physician came in an hour later. His name was Dr. Yoon. He was methodical and quiet, and he didn't soften things unnecessarily, which I appreciated even then. He told me about the arrhythmia. He told me how close it had been. And then he said something that made the room feel like it had shifted 2 inches to the left. He said, "Your husband arrived at the hospital last night." I felt something in my chest release. Relief, I think, raw and immediate. And then Dr. Yoon continued. He said, "He was here for approximately 40 minutes. He spoke with the billing desk. At one point, he asked the charge nurse whether you could be moved to a lower level of care more quickly." He paused. "He left before you were stable." I stared at him. He left before I was stable. He had been in this building while I was in the ICU with a heart monitor attached to my chest, and he had left. Dr. Yoon gave me a moment. Then he said, "There's someone in the waiting room who has been here since last night. She's not family, according to our records. She asked me to let you know she's here when you were ready for visitors. Her name is Lena." I didn't know anyone named Lena. I told him to send her in. The woman who walked through the door of my ICU room was somewhere in her mid-60s. She was short, with silver hair pulled back in a practical knot, wearing a fleece vest and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She looked exactly like someone who had spent the night in a waiting room, slightly rumpled, tired around the eyes, but she walked in with the composure of a person who had decided to be somewhere and had no intention of being talked out of it. She introduced herself quietly. Her name was Lena Marsh. She was my upstairs neighbor. We had exchanged maybe a dozen words in the 2 years I'd lived in my apartment. She knew my name. I knew she had a small dog named Clementine who sometimes barked at the mail carrier. That was the extent of it. She sat down in the chair beside my bed and folded her hands in her lap and told me what had happened. She said she had been up late reading when she heard something from my unit below her. A thud. And then nothing for a moment. And then another sound she couldn't quite identify. She said it bothered her enough that she came downstairs and knocked on my door. When there was no answer, but she could see light under the door, she tried the handle, found it unlocked, and let herself in. She found me on the kitchen floor, barely conscious, EpiPen already used. She called 911 again to make sure they were coming, and then she sat on the floor next to me and held my hand and talked to me until the paramedics arrived. She rode in the ambulance because she told them she was my aunt. She said it so matter-of-factly. I told them I was your aunt. I hope that's all right. I told her that was more than all right. She had been in that waiting room for 31 hours. I cried in a way I hadn't expected to. Not gently. The ugly, broken kind of crying that you usually only do alone, where your face does things you can't control and the sounds that come out don't sound like you. Lena didn't try to stop me or tell me everything was fine. She just stayed in her chair and waited, which was exactly the right thing to do. Later that day, my husband showed up. He walked in carrying a coffee cup and wearing the jacket he'd had on at his company's Thursday evening networking event, which I know because he'd sent me a photo of himself in it 3 days earlier. He looked alert, rested. He kissed my forehead and said, "God, you scared me." I didn't say anything. He sat down on the edge of the bed and started telling me about the traffic on the way to the hospital. He said the parking situation was a nightmare. He said he'd had to leave last night because he had an early meeting and didn't want to fall asleep in a hospital chair and show up looking unprepared. He said it the way you'd explain why you left a party early. Casual. Reasonable. A normal logistical decision. I asked him about the 23 calls. He said his phone had been on silent during the networking event, and he hadn't noticed until late. He said, "You know how it is at those things, the rooms are loud and I can't keep checking my phone." He said he'd called the hospital as soon as he saw the missed calls, and they told him I was being treated and stable. He said, "So I knew you were okay." I was in the ICU with a cardiac arrhythmia. He had decided I was okay. He stayed for about an hour. His mother called during that time and he stepped outside to take it. When he came back, he said she sent her love and hoped I felt better soon. He left to go home, shower, and get some sleep. He said visiting hours started again at 10 in the morning and he'd try to stop by on his lunch break. Try to stop by. Lena was back in that waiting room. I know because the nurse told me, unprompted, when she came in to check my vitals after he left. She said, "That woman with the silver hair is still here. She wanted to know if you needed anything from the vending machine." She said it the way people say things they think you should know. I told her to send Lena back in. She came in carrying a pack of crackers and a ginger ale, and she set them on the tray table without making a production of it. I asked her why she was still here. She looked at me for a moment like she was considering whether the question deserved an answer. She said, "Because you shouldn't be alone." That was it. No speech, no philosophy about it. Just a statement of plain fact from a woman who had a dog at home and a book she'd probably rather be reading, who had nonetheless decided that I shouldn't be alone in a hospital room and had acted accordingly. I found out from the nurses, not from Lena herself, that she had also spoken to the hospital's patient advocate the previous night. When my husband had asked about moving me to a lower level of care more quickly, Lena had, quietly, from the waiting room, without telling me any of this, asked to speak to someone about patient rights. She had made sure there was a record of the conversation. She had made sure no one could make a decision about my care without my own informed consent. She didn't tell me. She wasn't the kind of person who needed you to know about the good things she did. The hospital documented the conversation. It meant that if anything had been done differently based on outside pressure, there was a record of it. I was discharged on a Saturday morning. Lena drove me home. My husband had texted that morning, saying he had a work thing that ran longer than expected, and could his mother pick me up instead. But his mother lived 40 minutes away, and I hadn't wanted to ask her. Lena had offered the night before without being asked, and I had said yes. She walked me up to my apartment and waited until I was settled on the couch with water and the medications they'd sent me home with. She asked if I needed anything from the store. I said no. She stood at the door for a moment and said, "You have my number now, use it if you need to." Then she went upstairs to her apartment. I sat on my couch for a long time that afternoon. I had the kind of clarity that comes sometimes after a very close call. Not revelation exactly, but a lifting of something. A fog. The kind that accumulates so slowly you don't notice it until the morning it's gone, and the light looks different. I thought about the 23 calls. I thought about the networking event. I thought about the phrase, try to stop by. And I thought about Lena on the floor of my kitchen, holding my hand, telling the paramedics she was my aunt. My husband and I had been married for 4 years. We had a mortgage together, a joint account, 2 dogs, a standing Sunday dinner tradition with his family that I had not missed in 3.5 years except for once, when my own father was in the hospital, and that time his mother had called it such a shame that I had to miss it. I had smiled and agreed. I thought about that too. I had spent 4 years learning the specific and intricate geography of another family's needs. I knew which topics not to bring up at Sunday dinners. I knew how to respond when my mother-in-law made comments about my cooking, my decorating choices, the way I loaded the dishwasher. I had become so fluent in the language of making myself smaller and smoother and easier to accommodate that I had stopped noticing I was doing it. And then I had nearly died in my kitchen, and the person who had stayed was a woman who'd once asked me in the elevator if my package had accidentally been delivered to her unit. That's the thing about a moment like that. It doesn't let you lie to yourself anymore. You can try. You can tell yourself that he was scared and didn't handle it well, and people process fear differently. You can tell yourself that 23 calls is a lot, and maybe he really didn't feel his phone. You can tell yourself that leaving a hospital before someone is stable is a choice a frightened person might make. You can construct a version of events that is sympathetic and forgiving and reasonable. But somewhere underneath all of that, you know what you know. I know that when I was on my kitchen floor, I called him 23 times, and he did not come. I know that when he arrived at the hospital, his first interaction was with the billing desk. I know that he left before I was stable because he had an early meeting. I know that Lena, who did not know my last name until she looked at my medical bracelet, sat in a waiting room for 31 hours. The decisions we make when we are frightened and inconvenienced, and it costs us something. Those are the decisions that tell the truth about us. Not the Sunday dinners, not the anniversary cards, the 2 a.m. phone calls, the kitchen floors, the waiting rooms. My husband and I are separated now. I didn't make the decision that night in the hospital. I made it slowly, over the weeks that followed, as I got stronger and the clarity didn't go away. There were conversations that did not go well. There were tears, his and mine both, and long silences, and at least one evening where I almost talked myself back into the version of things that was easier to live with. Almost. His family had opinions, which is a gentle way of saying his mother called me ungrateful, and his sister sent a long text message about how I was blowing things out of proportion. I read the text twice, and then I set the phone face down on my kitchen counter and looked out the window for a while. His mother called it an overreaction. She said he'd been scared and didn't know how to show it. She said marriages have hard seasons. She said I should think carefully before I made any decisions I couldn't take back. She said all of this in the same tone she used to say it was a shame I'd missed Sunday dinner. I thought carefully. I thought carefully for 6 weeks. And then I filed. Lena and I have dinner together on Thursday nights now. Her daughter lives in Portland and calls every Sunday, and sometimes I'm there when the call comes in and I hear their conversation from the kitchen while I'm finishing the salad, and it sounds like 2 people who genuinely like each other. That specific warmth, that ease. Last month, Lena told me about her own marriage, which ended 22 years ago. She said it quietly, over leftover soup, without making it dramatic. She said, I stayed longer than I should have because I kept thinking the person I believed he was would eventually show up. It took me a long time to understand that the person who shows up when things are hard, that is the person. I turned that sentence over for a long time afterward. The person who shows up when things are hard, that is the person. I think about the 23 calls sometimes. Not with the kind of pain I felt at first, that specific searing quality that makes it hard to breathe, but more like looking at an old scar. Something that happened. Something that taught me the shape of certain things. I think about Lena on the floor of my kitchen. I think about what it means that the person who held my hand while I was losing consciousness was someone I barely knew. And I think about how much easier it is, looking back, to see that the hands that were supposed to be holding you, when you trace back through the years, through the Sunday dinners and the accommodations and the things you learned to stop saying, sometimes those hands were never really there either. That's a hard thing to see. It's also the thing that sets you free. I am fully recovered now. I check every label. I carry 2 EpiPens. I have Lena's number in my phone under the contact name Lena, aunt, which she thought was very funny. So when I showed her, I live alone in the same apartment, but it doesn't feel the same. It feels like mine. The kitchen, the drawer with the EpiPen, the window that gets morning light from October through February and then goes back to shade. Mine. If you're listening to this and you're in a relationship where you are quietly, consistently making yourself smaller, where you have learned the topography of someone else's comfort so well that you've forgotten what your own looks like, I want to tell you something. You don't need a dramatic moment to know the truth, but if one ever comes, pay attention to who shows up, pay attention to who doesn't, pay attention to who stays, and please carry your EpiPen.